So I did my presentation on the civil rights movement. I chose to do the civil rights movement because it is a major part in our history and it's still a major part in our world today. So the number one thing that I noticed was a lot of talk of the NAACP. So the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was a very important group that helped support people of color, and they helped defend people. So the NAACP worked with the Brown versus Board of Education for for all of its journey, and they were there to support them and make sure that everything went well. So with all organizations at this time not supporting people of color, there was not always a way to stop from discrimination, but they did the best they can. The motto that I really liked for the NAACP that I found was the one at the bottom of the page. I'm not going to read that out loud, but it kind of just shows that like they were there to support, even though they wanted things to change. They didn't want everything to change because it would ruin the economic system of the South. And they didn't want to ruin anything because that would affect them majorly. The next part was the Ku Klux Klan. They emerged right after the Brown versus Board of Education case, and they actually had incidences with the NAACP. So with the NAACP, a Mississippi field secretary named Medgar Evers actually was killed in his own driveway by a KKK member named Brian De La Beckwith on June 12th. So that happened along with many other deaths, and this was due to mobilization. So with the Klans being able to mobilize, they were able to recruit more people after the Brown decision, which caused for a lot of fighting, a lot of death, a lot of arrests, and it just was a big mess. Eventually, the KKK was disbanded. A big part of the civil rights movement was JFK. JFK died in 1963, but he drafted the Civil Rights Bill before he died. And Lyndon B. Johnson actually wanted to keep that alive, so he pushed it to Congress. So after the bill was pushed into motion, a man named Howard W. Smith, who is a Southern Democratic representative, added gender to a section of the bill. This was called Title VII. So much like our Title IX, this Title VII was there to support gender roles in the workplace. So you could not discriminate against a gender when applying for a job. So this bill was not passed easily. It was fought against. A lot of Southerners did not want to, and not just Southerners, a lot of white people also didn't want to give people of color their rights to anything. They didn't want to share anything. So it was not easy to get the bill passed. Eventually, President Johnson passed the bill on July 2nd of 1964. The bill was called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This became a law, and with all laws, there are some pushbacks, aftermath, messes, and this one had a lot of aftermath. It ended up being a two-part bill, I believe, or there was another part added to the bill, which was the voting bill of 1965. And this helped kind of ease things into the Civil Rights Act. So after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, there was an incident where a shop owner or a restaurant owner did not want these four black men in his restaurant and chased them out of his restaurant with a gun, and a few of the white customers chased them out with the ends of an axe. So the effects of the civil rights movement in the 20th century and the 21st century. This quote that I have is from an article that is about the 21st century, but it also goes with the 20th century. So first, the U.S. Civil Rights Movement was a watershed moment in the U.S. history, making it of particular relevance for studying the long-term ramifications of historical social movements. Second, the U.S. Civil Rights Movement was not only focused on institutional change and the end of Jim Crow, but also was concerned with fundamentally reshaping American values as they related to race. Third, the Civil Rights Movement was minimal organizational legacies relative to other social movements in history, making this a harder case to find persistent attitudinal effects. Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't mean to cough. So the civil rights movement is actually still going on today, especially right now during this pandemic, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with all of the protests that were happening, and especially during the beginning of the pandemic when George Floyd was killed. And they're still going on today, even with the presidential election being done with. We're still seeing a lot of racial differences and a lot of segregation. Not as much as we did back in 1964, but we're still seeing it. It's more of a population segregation instead of a complete divide where we're back to the 1964 movement. That's it. That's all I have. Thanks.